So the good folks at Microsoft have decided to end support for Windows 10, and they're limiting what computers can now upgrade to Windows 11. If you're like me and you've got some old computer kicking around like this old Dell that's got a Core i5 6500 CPU, you're going to be fetching around wondering what to do for an operating system for your older PC. What choice are you going to make? Are you going to knuckle under and buy a new PC, or are you going to find a way to make this work? Well, today on Tech Talk, we're going to be looking at Linux as an operating system and whether Linux is advanced enough now that it's really suitable for your average Windows user who likes to do everything through a graphical user interface. That's coming up right now, right here on Tech Talk. So if you've been on the internet looking at tech-related websites or YouTube channels like this one, no doubt you've seen a lot of interest in the Linux operating system lately. And why is that? Well, of course, Windows 10 support is ending. Only newer computers can run Windows 11, so that's leaving a lot of older computers out in the cold without an operating system that's being updated by its manufacturer. Now, the challenge with that is a lot of these older computers are still really, really good. Computing power has come so far in the last 10 years or so that an older PC still is perfectly acceptable for most productivity applications. A PC like this Dell that's got a Core i5 6500 CPU in it, it'll run Office applications no problem. Word, Excel, pretty much anything you want, PowerPoint. It'll do photo editing just fine. It'll surf the web just fine. It'll play media just fine. There's really no reason to recycle this computer and think about buying a new one. And so for a lot of folks, they're going to look at that and say, hey, do you know what? I really don't like this idea that Microsoft is trying to push me into buying a new computer. I want to keep this old computer going, but I don't want to spend a fortune doing it. So that's why a ton of people are now looking at Linux, because there's so many advantages that an operating system like Linux brings. First of all, you can put Linux in a computer like this and it will run really, really quickly because Linux is a very efficient operating system. It also keeps these older PCs going without any cost because Linux is free. And it gets you out from under the umbrella of Microsoft. I think lately a lot of people have a lot of concerns about Microsoft. They don't like how Microsoft is constantly pushing advertising on them. They're worried about what Microsoft does with their personal data. They worry about privacy breaches. And I think the thing that they've done with Windows 11, saying that Windows 11 has a minimum computer requirement, and then cutting off Windows 10 for everything else, I think that's really sat poorly with a lot of people. And so a lot of people are kind of, and I'm one of them to be honest, a lot of people are looking at Microsoft going, I don't know if this is a company that I'm really that fond of anymore, and I'm looking for alternatives. So for all these reasons, Linux is starting to become something that people are really looking into more than ever before. Because Linux offers an operating system that gets you out from under Microsoft. It's lightweight and works really quickly, and it's free. It's a super inexpensive way to get a fully functional modern operating system in an older PC. And when I say an older PC, we're focusing on that in this video because that's what's really being impacted by the end of Windows 10 support. But Linux works on any PC. Building a brand new PC and installing Linux on it just means you're going to have a super efficient PC that runs its applications really, really quickly. So although the focus is on older PCs, Linux can run on anything. So now what if you're not that familiar with what Linux is? Well, Linux is very interesting. It started way back in 1991, the whole Linux program, but it's really based on the Unix operating system that's been around since the 1970s. And without going too far down a rabbit hole, basically the way it was developed, there's a whole lot of people in the programming space and in the technology space that don't think that software and computing should be horribly expensive and should be dominated by a few major corporations. They believe that software and operating systems should be widely available, they should be free or very, very inexpensive, and they should be accessible to everyone. So they formed groups and organizations that developed Linux as an operating system, plus they develop all kinds of other software. LibreOffice is a Microsoft Office replacement that's offered for free. So there's all kinds of software, but specifically Linux, it's offered for free by these groups that believe in open source computing. And what open source means is that the code for Linux and the code for open source software is available to anyone. So you can download the code, you can modify it, you can adapt it to whatever you want, you can sell it as your own product. Basically, the idea is by putting free code out into the universe, you bring down the cost of this software, you let people develop it, you let people improve it, and we make advancements that way. So Linux is really an ecosystem that is very friendly to computer users and members of the public. It's being driven by people who are passionate about improving the software and not so much driven by a profit motive. So Linux and other open source type software generally doesn't have a lot of the problems you see with corporations like Google and Microsoft. Because they're not trying to make a profit, they're constantly not pushing advertising at you. They're not invading your privacy. They're not stealing your data and using it for whatever. They tend to make very user-friendly software. And Linux is one of those. And of course, the best part of Linux is it's lightweight, as I mentioned, and it's free. So it'll work on an older PC just fine, and being free means you can build a very inexpensive computer with it. And I thought what I'd do is just take a look at what some of the current prices are for these older generation refurbished PCs. Because with the end of Windows 10, any computer that doesn't support Windows 11, the price for those computers on Amazon, which is where I do most of my shopping, has come way down. And let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here we see a Dell Optiplex 3050 small form factor computer. It's got a Core i5-7500, 8 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and a 256 gigabyte solid state drive. It's got Windows 10 because it's not compatible with Windows 11, and it's selling for $114. Now, keep in mind, that's Canadian dollars. So in US money, that's going to be like 80 some odd dollars. I'll put the US equivalents down below just to give you an idea. But that's going to be way under $100 US. So when you think about it, that computer is going to be capable of doing all kinds of things. Like I mentioned, anything productivity-wise, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, it'll be perfectly fine for that. You can use it for photo editing, you can use it for surfing the web, for displaying media. All the stuff that families and small businesses typically do, that computer is going to be able to handle, and then some, and for next to nothing. So if you bought a computer like that, and you took out Windows 10, or installed Linux in place of Windows 10, or even installed Linux side by side along with Windows 10, which we're going to talk about later, you've got a really inexpensive computer. It's going to run like a frightened rabbit, and it costs you virtually nothing. It's a great option. Let's take a look at another one. Maybe that one's a little bit too big for you. You need something smaller, doesn't take up space. Here's an EliteDesk 800G3 Mini. It's got an i5-6500T processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 512 gig SSD. That's $158 Canadian. So that's going to be just a bit more than $100 US. Another great option. So these are just two examples of refurbished computers that are available right now for very, very little money. These are very inexpensive ways to get into computing using computers that will serve you really well in a home or small office environment. And Linux is the route that you can go to make sure that you have an up-to-date, safe operating system that will work with those computers really, really well. Now, you might be asking me, hey, look, I'm not really that familiar with Linux. You know, do many people use it? If it's free, it can't be that good, right? Well, it's true. Linux is only used in about 4% of desktop computers, but it's not like it's some crazy operating system built in somebody's garage that's kind of hacked together. It's actually very, very widely used just in other areas of computing. For instance, about 14% of all computer servers use Linux. 32% of websites run on Linux, and 72% of smartphones, believe it or not, run on Linux. And that's because the Android operating system is built on the Linux kernel. Linux is the underlying software, let's say, for the Android operating system. So Linux isn't some fly-by-night thing that's untested that you have to worry about. It's actually used very, very widely in all different sectors of computing. It's very well known, and it's very, very reputable and very solid when it comes to the way it functions. Now, if you're thinking about Linux and wondering whether or not it's going to be an operating system for you and why you haven't seen it before, there are some things about Linux that people have had challenges with. Linux has always been kind of the hobbyist operating system. So it's an operating system that's always taken a little bit more knowledge and understanding to kind of use well. It's not been quite as slick and easy to use as Windows is. So for a lot of Windows users that tried out Linux, they looked at it and said, oh, it requires me, to do commands on command line, and I've got to know some programming, and I'm not into it. But over the years, Linux has really improved, and it's come a long way to having much more Windows-like functionality. And of course, Linux is available in a lot of different versions. Now, those versions are called distributions. Because the Linux kernel, the core program of Linux, is available publicly to anybody, what happens is different organizations will take that kernel and they'll make their own version of Linux. And that's called a distribution. So there's various distributions like Red Hat's, Fedora, Linux Mint. The one I like is Ubuntu Linux. And the reason Ubuntu Linux I think is a good version of Linux for people who are used to Windows is because you can do almost everything on the graphic user interface, known as the GUI. You can install software, you can uninstall software, things update automatically. It works a lot more like Windows than other versions of Linux do. So for this video, we're going to be taking a look at Ubuntu Linux, and we're going to be saying, can somebody who's used to Windows, who's used to doing everything on the graphical user interface, can they install Ubuntu Linux on their computer and operate it well and be comfortable with it? And is that an appropriate choice for somebody that's got an older computer that no longer qualifies for a current version of Windows? Stay tuned, we're looking at that right now. So perhaps a bit surprisingly, the commonalities between Ubuntu Linux and Windows start right here at our login screen. Just like with Windows, when you first boot up to Linux, what you're going to see is your account that you set up during the Linux setup process. So I just click on my name, I'm going to put in my password, and that's going to take me straight to my desktop. Now once you get there, you'll note that Ubuntu Linux looks a fair bit different than Windows. Rather than having a taskbar at the bottom, we have this dock on the left-hand side with some fairly big icons. Rather than having our internet, speaker, and power options down on the bottom right, we have them here in the upper left. So it's kind of familiar, but also a little bit different. Where normally we'd have the Windows Start button, we've got the Show Apps button here on Linux, which gives us a screen that shows us all the apps installed on our Ubuntu Linux operating system. You'll note there's not a lot of apps here. Compared to Windows, Linux doesn't install a lot of bloatware. It really installs just what's necessary. Everything else is up to you to choose. So we can make this desktop a little more familiar to us as Windows users. If you want a graphical user interface that looks a little more like Windows, there's a few things we can do to accomplish that. The first is to change the placement and the icons in this dock. So just like Windows, we right-click on our desktop and we go to Display Settings. From there, we're going to go down to Ubuntu Desktop, and we're going to go to this section which says Dock. So the first thing I want to do is I want to move the dock position from the left side of the screen to the bottom. And then I want to make these icons a little bit smaller so they look a little more Windows-like. And that's looking better already. Now, perhaps we don't like that background that we've got. So what we can do is we can put one of our own pictures there, a picture of our vacation, our dog, our kids, whatever. And you simply do that by going to Appearance and by selecting a photograph. You can choose one of these stock photos or you can add your own. Just like in Windows, you can also change the colors of your Linux installation to match your background picture or whatever else you want. So the optimization of your desktop is very similar to Windows. If you've worked with Windows appearance personalization, this is probably making a whole lot of sense to you. Now, when it comes to installing applications, this is an area where Linux is really advanced. Believe it or not, back in the day, installing and uninstalling applications on Linux was very manual. You had to go to the command line and you had to type commands like sudo apt update, sudo apt install, and then the name of the package you're installing. Then you had to manage your dependencies and all kinds of other work. You really had to be, halfway a computer scientist to figure out how to manage the software on your computer. But with this version of Ubuntu Linux, it's getting a whole lot easier. Now we have an app store, just like the Windows Store, just like the Apple Store, just like the Google Play Store. You can simply go to the store and manage all of your apps there. You can install apps, you can uninstall apps, and the App Store will manage all the updates for your apps as well. So let's see what that looks like. We're going to go to our App Store. And there it is there. And the Explorer is where you can choose to install new applications. So let's say we want to install Inkscape, which is a great vector graphics editor. We just go to the search bar, type in Inkscape, and it comes up right at the top. We can click on it, and we see that Inkscape is available for installation. So we'll go ahead and hit the install button. I'll put in my password and hit authenticate. And now Inkscape is installing. Once it's installed, we can go ahead and hit the open button. And now we have access to Inkscape. There it is. So if you're curious now about where Inkscape shows up outside of that open button, it will show up in your applications. So if we go down to what would be equivalent to the Windows Start button, the Show Apps button here in Linux, that takes us to the screen with all our applications. Again, we go to the next page, and there you see Inkscape. Once again, we can start it up from there, and there you have it. So that's how you go about installing an application. Now, what if we want to get rid of Inkscape? Well, that's just as easy. We go back to the App Center. We go down here to Manage Our Applications, and it shows us all of our installed applications. So we simply have to pull this drag-down menu, hit Uninstall, and that program will no longer be there. So that's how you install and uninstall from the App Store. There are thousands upon thousands of applications available in the App Store, and they're all that easy to manage. But now what happens if there's an application we want that isn't in the App Store? Well, it doesn't mean that you're completely shut out either. The process for putting a non-App Store application onto Linux isn't all that hard. Let's say for some strange reason, we really like Microsoft Edge. So what we can do is we can search for Microsoft Edge for Linux in the Firefox browser. And we see here a link at Microsoft that talks about downloading Edge for Linux. So if we click on that, we go to the bottom of the page, it says Microsoft Edge is now available on Linux, download for Linux. So we'll click on that, we'll accept the licensing, and once we do that, just like in any other browser, we see our download starting here in the upper right. Now once that download finishes up, what we're going to do is go into our download file, like so. We're going to go Microsoft Edge Stable, which is the name of our package, and we're going to open it with App Center. Now, once again, our App Center will come up, and we get a warning saying that this app is potentially unsafe. The only reason it's saying that is because we're not installing it directly from the App Center. We're installing it from a third party, so it's just a reminder that that's the case. We're going to go ahead and hit Install, and we're going to put our password in. And we can see here it's installing Microsoft Edge. Now we see a note here, it says Microsoft Edge is installed. So we can close off our App Center, we can close off our download folder. We'll close off Firefox. If we go to our apps, second page, there's Microsoft Edge, and now we can use Microsoft Edge. No problem at all. Now, what if we want to get rid of Microsoft Edge? If we go back to the App Center and we go back to Manage like we did before, we see that Edge doesn't show up in our installed files. And that's because only applications that were installed through the App Store will show up here. If you installed it outside of the App Store, it's not included. So how then do we go about getting rid of that program if we decide we don't want it anymore? Well, this is where, if you're a Windows user, things are a little bit different, because now you do have to use the command line. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Terminal, and we're going to do a code. Now, this may seem daunting, but it's actually really easy. And it's one of the things about transitioning from Windows to Linux that people do need to be aware of. From time to time, you're going to have to use Terminal to manually do a few things. Thankfully, in Linux, most of this is really easy. For instance, getting rid of Microsoft Edge is as easy as this. We just type sudo apt purge, and then the name of our package, which is Microsoft, sorry, my typing's really bad, Edge Stable. Now, once we enter that, it wants my password again. And now it's going to just double make sure that I really want to uninstall Edge. I'm going to hit yes. And then it takes out everything related to Edge from the computer. Now we can easily confirm that by going back to our apps. And we see now that the icon for Microsoft Edge is gone. It's been completely uninstalled. Now, having said all that, there are some things that you can get on Windows that you can't get on Linux. The fact of it is, not every piece of software that's available in a Windows-based PC is available for a Linux-based PC. It just doesn't work that way. And one of the big ones is Microsoft Office. Office just isn't available on Linux at all, and it kind of makes sense because Microsoft developed Windows. Microsoft wants you to use Windows for Office. I get it. So for situations like that, typically in Linux, you're going to find that there is software that you can use as a replacement. So instead of Microsoft Office, what we have on Linux is something called LibreOffice. Like Linux, LibreOffice is open source software. It's freely available to the public. And it basically replaces all the Microsoft Office applications. We have Writer instead of Word, we have Calc instead of Excel, we have Impress instead of PowerPoint, etc. Now, if we open Writer, we can see that it actually looks a lot like Word. The functionality is largely the same. If you use Word, you're basically going to understand how to use Writer. There might be a few differences and variations that you have to get used to, but the functionality is pretty close. Now, I am going to give you a caution here. LibreOffice advertises that all of its functions can save in Microsoft formatted files. So you can save a Writer document as a Word document. You can save a Calc spreadsheet as an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I worked with a business for a couple of years where we didn't want to pay for the Microsoft Office suite. We were using LibreOffice extensively. That functionality of converting things to Microsoft files doesn't work well. If I save a Writer document or an Excel spreadsheet in Word or Excel, and I open it up in the Microsoft product after having generated it in LibreOffice, all kinds of things break. The formatting doesn't look right. The fonts don't look right. In Excel, not all the formulas work. It's a pain. So I don't really like that functionality. It's widely advertised that, oh, you can use LibreOffice just like Microsoft Office. It doesn't translate well. Anytime you're translating file types like that, there's always going to be errors. So for LibreOffice, I really like it. It works really, really well. It's awesome. If you're putting out your product as a PDF at the end of the day, it works great. The one area where it doesn't work is if you're collaborating with other people who are using Microsoft Office products. If you're trying to collaborate on files and you're sharing back and forth, your LibreOffice files aren't going to work well in Microsoft Office and vice versa. So while this is a great Office program, just be aware that it's not the same as using Office and Excel if you're having to collaborate with others that are using that software. So that really is a brief demonstration of Ubuntu Linux. And if you notice now, my desktop looks a lot like a Windows desktop. Is it exactly the same? No, but it's similar enough that anybody coming from Windows 10 could pretty much figure out the functionality without a whole lot of work. So now, all that being said, who will Linux work for? Well, if you're a Windows user and you're thinking about switching to Linux, it's going to work for a ton of people. Like, I think there's gobs and gobs of Windows users, even those that never use the command line, that really rely on the graphical user interface. They can start with Linux. They can install Ubuntu Linux, get the hang of it in short order, get the software they need installed, and get working on it right away. I think the learning curve for moving from Windows to Linux has come way down in recent years. It's been made a whole lot easier. That having been said, you do have to understand, though, you're moving from the Microsoft ecosystem to the Linux ecosystem, which is really an open source ecosystem. So the advantage of that open source ecosystem is that your software is going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to have a lot less advertising. You don't have the privacy concerns you do with Microsoft. But it's never going to be exactly the same as Microsoft. You have to accept you're moving to a new ecosystem. Things are going to look differently. Things are going to have some different functionality. There's going to be a few things to get used to. Like I say, I don't think the barrier is that high anymore, but you can't expect to move to Linux and just fit right in and everything is exactly the same and nothing's changed. It's not quite like that. So I think for the vast majority of home users in particular and small office users, you can move to this and be just fine. I don't think that the barrier is such that you should be shy of it at all. But I think if you're not willing to do a bit of learning, and if you're the kind of person where, you know, I don't like to learn things, I don't like change, it stresses me out, I don't like to have to adapt, you know, maybe that switch isn't for you. Maybe if you've got an old Windows 10 machine, your better option is to go off and buy a new computer and move to Windows 11, because it's not going to have, you know, it's going to be super familiar to you. It'll be a lot easier than this. The other person it might not work for, like I mentioned, because the open office software like LibreOffice, OpenOffice, etc., because they don't speak directly the same language, so to speak, as the Microsoft Office, you're going to have a hard time switching files in between. I don't think Linux is good for anybody that, like I say, has to collaborate with people who are using Microsoft Office. you'd be better off sticking to Windows. It's going to save you some headaches. So what's the bottom line then? Well, I think the bottom line, and what we've learned looking at Ubuntu Linux here, is that if you're a Microsoft Windows user and you kind of gotten tired of Microsoft as a corporation, you're upset about your older computer being cut off from Windows, you're upset about the costs of Microsoft products, you're upset about the privacy breaches of Microsoft, Linux is now a viable option, and particularly Ubuntu Linux, because again, this is a version that I think is most Windows-like and is easiest for your average Windows user to kind of fit into and feel comfortable in. You don't have to be a command line genius. You don't have to know tons of commands. Anything you do need to know, you can very quickly and easily Google. It's not hard. I don't think this should be intimidating to anybody. If you're curious about how to install Ubuntu Linux on your Windows PC, next week I'll have a video that shows exactly what that process is. It's super easy. Literally anybody can do it. Now, as for myself, I got to admit, this is the first I've used Linux in years and years and years. I'm really impressed with this. I really, really like it. I think more of my computers going forward are going to be Linux, and some of my computers that are currently running Windows, I think I'm going to have to convert because I'm really impressed, so I'm really happy with it. What do you think? Is Ubuntu Linux something you think might be workable for you? Are you willing to make the switch and to do the little bit of learning it might take to get comfortable with it? Or are you diehard going to stick with Windows till the end of time? I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. Leave your comments down below. I like to read and respond to just about everybody if I can. Again, next week we're going to be looking at how to install Linux. Don't miss that video. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. That helps me out a ton. I'm Graham Hughes. This is Tech Talk. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.